How are Canadians quietly retiring at 55 without going broke? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Most of them don't have $850,000 in their RRSP. Most of them have between $200,000 and $500,000. And the strategy that separates the quiet retirees from the broke ones isn't a windfall or a pension. It's a 10-year bridge plan from age 55 to 65. The math works differently depending on how much you actually have saved. In this video, I'm going to show you the exact withdrawal numbers, the optimal CPP timing, and the one safety net that most guides leave out entirely. If you've been told you can't retire at 55 because you don't have $1 million, this video is specifically for you. But before we get into the framework, the first number you need to understand isn't your RRSP balance. It's the permanent cost of taking CPP at 60 instead of waiting. That one decision alone can change your entire bridge by over $185,000 over a 30-year retirement. And most people make it for the wrong reason. Let's start with a number that surprises most people. If you take CPP at 60 instead of 65, your monthly benefit is permanently reduced by 0.6% for every month before age 65. That's 60 months, which equals a 36% permanent reduction, not a temporary cut. In 2026, the maximum CPP monthly payment at age 65 is $1,433. Take it at 60, and you lock in $917 per month for life. That's $11,005 per year instead of $17,196. The difference is $6,191 every single year. Over a 30-year retirement, that one decision costs you roughly $185,730 in lost lifetime income. And that's before you account for inflation adjustments, which widen the gap even further. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. CPP is designed to be actuarially neutral, meaning the government expects you'll collect about the same total amount whether you start at 60 or 65. And at the population level, that's technically true. But for an individual retiree in decent health, actuarially neutral at the population level is not the same as neutral for you. If you live to 85, which is not unusual anymore, waiting until 65 to take CPP adds roughly $92,000 in additional lifetime benefits compared to starting at 60. So why do so many Canadians still take it early? A lot of it comes down to a misunderstanding about RRSP withdrawals. When you pull more than $15,000 from your RRSP in a single calendar year, the bank withholds 30% immediately. That feels like a massive tax hit. So people look at that number and think, I'll just take CPP at 60 instead and avoid touching the RRSP. It seems logical. But here's the thing, that 30% withholding isn't extra tax. It's a prepayment toward your regular annual tax bill. If your effective rate on that $30,000 RRSP withdrawal is closer to 8% or 9%, you get most of that withheld amount back at tax time. So what's actually happening is this: people are making a six-figure, permanently irreversible decision based on a cash flow misunderstanding. They're avoiding a temporary inconvenience, the big withholding number, and trading it for a permanent $6,191 per year reduction in their government income. That's not a conservative choice. That's an expensive one. If you're the type of person who'd rather take the money now because you don't fully trust that the government will be there later, I understand that instinct. But what you're actually protecting isn't your money. It's a belief that the system is going to pull the rug out from under you. And that belief, over 30 years, costs you more than most people spend on a vehicle. One more thing worth noting: if you end up deferring CPP past 65, the benefit actually grows by 0.7% per month. That's 8.4% per year. Wait until 70, and your CPP is 42% higher than the age 65 amount. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. So if taking CPP at 60 is one of the most expensive retirement decisions you can make, how do you actually fund the 10 years from 55 to 65 without it? That's where the RRSP meltdown comes in, and where a lot of people make their second biggest mistake. Before we get into the framework, I want to pause on something, because if your first reaction to this video was, "That sounds great, but it's not really for me," that reaction is worth examining. Most people who hear retire at 55 immediately think, that's for people with defined benefit pensions, teachers, government workers, people who had something set up for them decades ago. If you spent your career in the private sector, building your RRSP on your own, the phrase early retirement can feel like it belongs to a different category of people. That feeling isn't laziness. It's not lack of ambition. It's what happens when the financial industry spends decades telling you that retirement means replacing 70% of your working income for the rest of your life. Under that definition, yes, you probably need close to $1 million. Under that definition, most Canadians are behind. But retiring at 55 doesn't mean never earning another dollar. It means designing a 10-year bridge from 55 to 65, not a 40-year full replacement. Those are two completely different problems, and they require two completely different amounts of money. I used to get this wrong myself. When I first started running the numbers on retiring earlier than the standard age, I looked at my RRSP balance and thought there was no way. It took me a while to realize I was solving the wrong problem entirely. I was asking, do I have 30 years of income? When the actual question was, can I bridge 10 smart years until CPP and OAS replace the heavy lifting? That shift in thinking doesn't put food on the table by itself, but it gets you to the right question, and the right question is where the actual plan begins. Okay, so if the 10-year bridge is the right frame, what does it actually look like in practice? Let's use a concrete example. Say you're 55 years old, you have $350,000 in your RRSP, and you're trying to figure out if you can stop working in the next few years. The three-bucket bridge breaks that $350,000 into three functional pieces, and each piece has a specific job. Bucket 1 is the cash reserve. This is roughly 10% of your RRSP, in this case $35,000, kept in cash or a short-term GIC. You don't touch this money for investing. It exists for one purpose only: to fund your first 2 to 3 years of the bridge without selling a single investment. This is what protects you from a stock market correction in the first years of retirement. We'll come back to why that matters in the next section. Bucket 2 is the meltdown stack. This is the working core of the bridge, roughly $220,000 in this example. You withdraw from this in equal annual slices. In this scenario, $30,000 per year. The bank withholds 30% on that, so $9,000 comes off immediately. But that 30% isn't your final tax. It's a prepayment. If your actual effective rate on $30,000 of income is around 7% to 10%, which is realistic in most provinces, once you account for the basic personal amount and other credits, you'll see most of that withheld amount come back as a refund in spring. Your real after-tax income from the meltdown is closer to $27,000 per year. Bucket 3 is the growth core. About $95,000 stays invested through the meltdown years, continuing to compound. It's not touched during the bridge. When CPP and OAS come online at 65, this becomes a backstop buffer, extra room if the income gap is wider than expected. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with a calculator and an old tax form, running this exact math. I had assumed the 30% withholding meant the RRSP meltdown was going to cost me a fortune. When I actually looked at the effective rate, below $57,375 in taxable income The federal rate is 15%. The numbers looked completely different. The bridge went from theoretical to actual plan that afternoon. Now, $27,000 per year from the meltdown alone is not enough to live on for most people. So where does the rest come from? This is the part that most early retirement guides skip over. Let me show you two versions of the next 15 years. Same starting point, $350,000 RRSP, age 55. Two different decisions. In the first version, you take CPP at 60 to reduce the pressure on your RRSP. You pull $30,000 a year from the RRSP without a sequencing strategy. At 60, CPP kicks in at around $11,005 per year, plus the RRSP meltdown, giving you roughly $41,000 annually. That feels solid at the time. But here's what happens at 65. Your RRSP is largely depleted from a decade of unstructured withdrawals. Your CPP is permanently locked at the reduced early start rate. OAS arrives at $8,628 per year. So your total income at 65, the year most of your working peers are just starting to think about retirement, is somewhere around $25,824. That's a drop of more than 37% from what you were living on at 60. That's the fragility path. In the second version, you use the 3-bucket bridge and delay CPP. From ages 55 to 64, your income is roughly $27,000 from the RRSP meltdown, plus $15,000 to $20,000 from part-time work or consulting. That puts you at $42,000 to $47,000 per year, comparable to the fragility path in the short term, but built on a completely different foundation. At 65, CPP comes in at the full rate, $17,196. OAS adds $8,628. Your remaining RRSP, which still has around $65,000 in the growth core after a decade of partial compounding, generates another $3,000 to $4,000 per year. Your total income at 65 is around $28,000 to $30,000, lower than your bridge years, but stable, growing with inflation, and not dependent on selling anything. And if you defer CPP all the way to 70, the math gets even stronger. Delayed CPP at 70 is approximately $24,418 per year. OAS deferred to 70 adds roughly $11,734. That's over $36,000 per year from government income alone, before touching $1 of personal savings. The resilience path doesn't mean you must delay CPP. It means you have the option to. When you've built a bridge that doesn't depend on early CPP, that decision stays in your hands. And having that choice is what retirement security actually feels like. But all of this assumes the market behaves during your first years of withdrawal. What happens when it doesn't? Here's the risk that almost never gets mentioned in early retirement conversations. Suppose you retire at 55, and in the first 2 years, the stock market drops 25% to 30%. This isn't a once-in-a-generation event. We've seen moves like this in 2000 to 2002, in 2008 to 2009, and more recently in 2022. If your RRSP is fully invested in equities, and you need to withdraw $40,000 to $50,000 a year to live on, you're selling units at the bottom of the market. The following year, if the market is still down, you sell more units at the bottom. By year 3 or 4, you've consumed a much larger percentage of your portfolio than the withdrawal math suggested, because you were selling into a loss, not withdrawing from a gain. A Morningstar Canada analysis of sequence of returns patterns found that a retiree who experiences a 25% market drop in the first 2 years and continues withdrawing from equities loses approximately 35% to 40% more portfolio value over 10 years compared to a retiree who uses a cash buffer. That difference isn't recovered by good years later. the units are already gone. This is exactly what Bucket 1 in the 3-bucket bridge is designed to handle. With $35,000 in cash or short-term GICs, you can cover years 1 through 3 of the bridge without selling a single equity position. By year 4, if the market has recovered, which historically it has, within 3 to 5 years, you begin the RRSP meltdown from a position of strength instead of damage. The unprepared version of this story ends with a 60-year-old who is CPP dependent because the RRSP ran out faster than expected. The prepared version ends with the same 60-year-old whose growth core is still intact and whose CPP is still deferred. So the cash buffer protects you from the market. But what protects you from yourself? Because the hardest part of retiring at 55 isn't running the math. It's sticking to the plan when the market is down 20% and every instinct is telling you to do something. Here's what usually happens after someone watches a video like this. They feel good about the framework. They think, okay, I need to look into this. They close the tab. 6 months later, they're still at the same desk, and the plan is still theoretical. The bridge doesn't fail because the math is hard. It fails because the next step never gets taken. So let me give you 5 concrete levers. Not concepts, not principles, actual things you can act on. Lever 1. Calculate your bridge number. Take your current annual spending, subtract any part-time or consulting income you expect to earn during the bridge. Multiply that net amount by 10. Then divide by 0.85 to account for an average effective tax rate of roughly 15%. That total is the gross amount you need to withdraw from your RRSP and TFSA over the 10-year bridge. It gives you a target before you run any other numbers. Lever 2, build the cash reserve. Move 10% of your RRSP into cash or a 1-year GIC before you retire. The minimum is $25,000. This is your sequence of returns protection. The buffer that keeps you from selling equities into a down market in years 1 through 3. Lever 3, calibrate the meltdown. Withdraw between $25,000 and $40,000 per year from your RRSP during the bridge. The ceiling is roughly $57,375 in total taxable income before you hit the second federal bracket. Below that line, your federal rate stays at 15%. Stay in that window for the full 10 years, and your effective tax on the withdrawals will be a fraction of the headline withholding rate. Lever 4. Defer CPP to 65 if you can. Every month you wait past 60 reduces the permanent penalty, and if you can hold past 65, CPP grows by 0.7% per month, or 8.4% per year. By 70, that's a 42% increase over the age 65 amount. The bridge buys you the time to make that decision from a position of strength rather than necessity. Don't trade that option away early. Lever 5, add 1 income bridge. Part-time work, a small consulting practice, or any activity that generates $15,000 to $20,000 per year during the bridge does 2 things. It fills the income gap that the RRSP meltdown alone can't cover. And it gives you structure, purpose, and social engagement during the years when a lot of early retirees quietly find that they needed those things more than they expected. The 5 levers work together. Use just 1 or 2, and you have a partial bridge. Use all 5, and you have a retirement at 55 that doesn't require $1 million RRSP. So let's bring it back to the original question. How are Canadians quietly retiring at 55 without going broke? Not by having $850,000 in an RRSP. Most of them have between $200,000 and $500,000. What they have is a 10-year bridge built on 3 things: a structured RRSP meltdown that stays inside the lowest tax bracket, the discipline to delay CPP towards 65 instead of taking it early, and a cash reserve that protects the whole plan if the market turns against them in the first few years. If you're sitting there right now with $200,000 to $500,000 saved and wondering if the math actually works for someone in your situation. It does, but it requires a plan, not just a feeling. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what that plan looks like, subscribe to Brian's Canadian Retirement Playbook so you don't miss next week's video, where I'll walk through building your personal bridge calculator with real withdrawal numbers. And hit the bell notification so you're in the room when I cover the OAS clawback years. That's where most retirees quietly lose thousands of dollars without ever realizing it's happening. The quietest Canadians aren't the ones who retired with $1 million. They're the ones who built a bridge with what they had. Now you know how. I'll see you in the next video.